So what's it like to leave the TV news business? Our next guest on X-TV Newsers is going to tell us all about it. Hi, I'm X-TV producer Jennifer Moore, and with me is JP Hervis. And JP has now been out of the TV news business for about 10 years, so we're going to talk to him all about his career, what he's doing now, and also tips for you if you are a journalist looking to transition out. JP, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
And JP, you worked in the news business for quite a long time at several different stations. Can you tell us about your career track?
Well, for most of us, it starts in college because I was always told that if you're going to get into the news business, grades are important, but experience is more important. So I attended the University of Florida. The University of Florida had an excellent television news program. So I spent as much time as I could at that station. I worked at a radio station off campus as well, and I wanted to be a sports journalist. My first job out of school was as a production assistant at ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut. While that was great, you're at ESPN and all that, I wanted to get on the air. So I started sending, back then, I'm going to date myself, I was sending resume tapes out on a consistent basis, and I wasn't getting any calls for sports jobs. So I said, okay, I just need to try to get on the air. Let me just get on the air and build from there. So let me go try this news thing. And sure enough, I got, after sending, I think it was 48 resume tapes for sports jobs out and getting no calls, I got 3 calls in 2 days on my news tape that I made. And I ended up taking a job at WBOY television in Clarksburg, West Virginia. It was a 1.5-year contract. From there, I was blessed to go to WLBT television in Jackson, Mississippi. And then when that was done, I got my, I guess people would call it the big break. I got to work at WSVN Channel 7, the Fox affiliate in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale market, where I was enormously happy. Eventually, I did get recruited. I hadn't been a full-time anchor yet. It was almost all field work, a lot of fill-in anchor work. And I said, this is the last thing I really need to do in local TV to see how I feel about it. And I got recruited to be a morning anchor, and I started working at WPBF television in West Palm Beach, the ABC affiliate there. And then I got there roughly about 2008, and a couple months in, the economy collapsed. It was the massive downshift in the economy. And like so many other people in so many other industries, especially the news business, I lost my job. I lost my job in the economic collapse. So I had that moment where you sit there and you recognize yourself, and your friends know you, your family knows you, and you love this news business. You're generally considered better than average, I guess. And you decide, okay, do I want to get back into this? What other options are there out there for me? Do I want it? Will I have the passion for it? So that was a road I had to travel.
Wow. All right. And we've been having an ongoing conversation about starting pay in TV news. Would you be willing to share what your first job paid at WBOY? And what year was that?
That was, I'm dating myself, 2002. I made $15,000 my first year. And you know what? I say it with pride, because one thing the news business does in those early years in those smaller markets, and I say this a lot to the young journalists out there who may watch this, is it's just going to test how much you want to do this, because it's not an industry that you do for anything other than the passion of storytelling or for journalism, or if you're just a people person. It's a great way to see different things and be a part of history on a day-to-day basis sometimes. And one of the ways it tests you is you just get paid really poorly, especially early on. So, my parents were happier because it was either going to be journalism or law school, and I didn't have to deal with the law school payments or anything like that. So there was some times where I had to swallow my pride and call my parents, and when I was 21 years old, and say, hey, listen, I just need X hundred of dollars to maybe get a little bit more groceries or get some gas. And you just kind of make your way through it that way for your first job sometimes.
That's a good way to think about it, because I remember when I started, someone was like, your first job is sort of like grad school for journalism. And that is a good way to, at least there are no student loans, I guess. But yeah, it does seem funny because I was talking to someone, and the job that she had like 10 years ago, someone else has, they're getting paid the same thing. I was like, that's...
We were talking before, and you mentioned TV, and probably journalism as a whole. I think my print colleagues would agree with this. It doesn't really respond to inflation in the same way that other industries do.
No, not at all. What was it originally that made you want to get into the business?
Well, it really began with me being such a sports fan. and wanting to be a sports reporter and being a part of that world. I mean, just sports was my life growing up as a kid, and watching it and playing it. And, I used to say, ESPN was my ultimate dream when I was a kid. ESPN went on the air 2 days after I was born, so it was meant to be. I said that in my job interview at ESPN, actually. And I did it at the University of Florida, and I hosted a sports radio program. So it really was, in fact, my love for sports. And I always said when I was in college, there's no way I'm going to do that news stuff. I don't want to be around death and murder and dirty politicians and knocking on the door of somebody who may have tragically lost somebody and asking them to go on TV about it. And sure enough, I knew that when I got to ESPN working as a production assistant, I could have stayed there for a while and probably grown and maybe gotten a sports job down the road, but I didn't want too much time spent from when I had previously been on camera, which was my senior year in college. So I was only at ESPN for about 9 months before I decided to take that chance at getting the news job. And sure enough, probably when about 3 to 6 months of that first job, WBOY television, I said, you know what, I think this news way is the right way to go overall, especially because local sports was trending in a certain direction. I thought would be far more challenging and unrealistic to really progress in the manner that I wanted to.
Yeah, those are really good thoughts. And I don't think people realize it's not like you just go to work at ESPN and they give you an on-air job. Typically, those networks hire people with prior experience, and you need to get that experience in order to get to somewhere like that. So that's interesting that you started off at ESPN. And a lot of people do that. They'll start working as a network as like a writer,
Right.
or a PA or something, and then they're able to land that first on-air job. Okay, so in your opinion, what is the best and the worst parts about working in the news business?
The best parts of the news business, I'll split this into two answers. One is when you write that story that hits that emotional tone, that has an effect, and you know it. You did your live shot perfectly. The package was great. It had the right nat breaks, and it had a right emotional toll, and it maybe broke the pace of the average story, where sometimes you do 10 fire stories, they all look the same. You do 10 murder stories, they all look the same. You do, these kind of things that sometimes are frequent in local markets. When you write that good story, you can get some chills from it. If you deliver that good live shot, you get some chills from it. And I think the second thing, in no particular order, is you really do have a chance to help people. As a journalist, you absolutely have a chance to help people. And I never spent too much time in any market that I didn't work in where I felt that I couldn't or didn't help somebody with the story I told, even in the most tragic cases. And the most difficult thing to deal with in news for me personally was, and I think it got to me after 11, 12 years, was dealing with victims' families, whether it was the wife of the soldier who died overseas that you have to try to interview, or it was the mom whose child died in a shootout, and you got to interview them within 5 hours of them finding out and convincing them and doing it in an ethical way. That takes quite the toll, but you do it, and you know that if some person at home watches the story about tragedy X, maybe somebody who's driving irresponsibly and caused a tragic accident, maybe somebody at home drives a little slower that day or the next day. Maybe there's 3 or 4 people who decide, you know what, I need to stop texting and driving or something. And you might not know if that happens, but you got to guess that perhaps maybe that one time, that one person who's watching it, you do make a change with this tragic story you tell from the viewpoint of the people that have been affected by the tragedy. And then that makes a difference and helps people when they don't even know it.
All right. And on the flip side, what are some not gripes, but things that you didn't particularly like about working in news? A lot of people say the schedule.
Yeah, certainly the pay. Certainly the pay for the most part. It takes a couple of rounds of different contracts and different stations before you get to a comfortable place. Schedules, I was a mediocre morning anchor at best. That morning shift, God bless them. I would wake up at 2:45 in the morning, get to the station about 3:15, start running through scripts. I wasn't ever a coffee drinker until I got on the morning show, and I was doing coffee and Red Bull at the same time. So it wasn't like the healthiest lifestyle.
So you're not really a morning person. Is that what you're saying here, JP?
No, well, I think now, years later, strangely enough, I'm a morning person. But there's morning, and then there's 2:45 in the morning. There is that difference there. I'm always impressed by the folks who do so well in morning television, because it's so difficult, especially because you do have to have that that brighter, happier side to you that you have to bring and get into a tough story, but then get into a bright conversation. And it's quite the dance that you really have to have the skill to do. And I think I tried my best. Maybe it was best that the economy collapsed and I got let go from that job. But so I think the pay, the schedule, some of the things that you have to go through there, you find yourself in uncomfortable situations that you don't want to be in. Whereas, referring to my previous point, the times that you do have to interview people who have gone through tragedy where positive can come out of it, that stuff takes a toll. I specifically remember a time where I interviewed a girl in the hospital who wanted to speak to us, who had been in a car accident 10 hours previously, and her sister died in the accident. And when I told that story, which just was horrible because I'm very close to my brother, I choked up on my live shot out. I started crying when I was signing out, and my photog is like, you have to get off the side. So there's an emotional toll though. The Parkland shooting happened 5 miles from my house. I live in Boca Raton, Florida now. Parkland is just 5 miles south. I live essentially in between the two markets I worked in here in Florida. I have a lot of friends who covered that, and I know what the toll it took with them. I know it. So you still see that now. So I think you have to be, that's not as much of a gripe as it is a reality that you have to accept in the business. And you never want to get cold to it. I think if you've been in the business long enough where you cover every murder story the same way, or whatever, name a tragedy the same way, and you almost have the same template of story, it's time to get out. When the emotion's gone, the quality storytelling gone, it's time to try something else. Get your mediology degree or something.
Yeah, it's almost like you're desensitized at that point. And
it helps. Yeah. It helps sometimes because you have some clarity of thought when you're in the middle of a huge crime scene. But by the same token, if it affects your pen to paper and how you tell it, you're not doing justice by the people who you think you could help by telling the story the right way.
Yeah. And is there something about the business that you feel like gets misrepresented, or is there something you want to share about the industry overall that you don't think people know?
I think that the belief in biasness in traditional news, especially nowadays, is totally off pace. I've worked in a mid-Atlantic market in West Virginia. I worked in the Deep South. I worked in Miami and I worked in West Palm. And in local news, the rank and file, line producers, executive producers in a lot of cases, all of my news directors I know, my videographers, my live truck operators, certainly myself, my fellow reporters, my competing reporters, there was never conversations of swaying in a certain way. I was never told to move any way, any ideological way whatsoever. The cable news business is a whole nother animal. And you know that better than I do because you have to fill 24 hours. But I think that the belief that journalists walk around really applying what their own personal beliefs are into what's going on is just that is a snowball that's turned into an avalanche. And I hope we as a journalism community, because I think you'll agree, even though you and I are technically out of it, we still believe in it and we have friends in it and we want good things to come from it because of the value. That's an avalanche that we have to do something about because it's in the public's best interest that traditional news outlets are respected and they have a clear understanding of what is news and what is commentary. That's the kind of a secondary issue, I think, that's going on throughout the news industry.
Yeah, I always found it kind of not strange, but just unbelievable how much hate and how much criticism, particularly the on-air folks like you faced on a even daily basis. The hate mail, the comments, even out in public, people will say things to you that they probably wouldn't say to someone else. Do you remember ever getting some weird like hate letters or like, I don't know, because I remember Anthony Ponce told me about a weird one he got. I don't know. Do you have any stories?
I did a story on a police officer in one of the markets that we found out was being investigated by the federal government. And we had our sources and we went with it. And I got some death threats. I got some death threats from that. I certainly have gone to cover crime scenes and had people. I got chased with a knife one time at a crime scene by a victim's family. I'm not even upset about that
Oh
because
my gosh.
obviously emotional toll. Um, yeah, things have been certainly said to me here and there. But a lot of times it's in the spur of the moment and the spur of the emotion and some of the really difficult stories that I've covered. I think a lot of people, especially here in Florida, and I think other places in the Gulf Coast can relate to that. When you have to go into hurricane coverage mode and you go into somebody's town, um, and you're there way too early, we in Florida would get a lot of criticism about making people too afraid of something. Instead of them not having an understanding that we have a duty as journalists to inform and let people decide, how much in danger they think they should feel, and operating in an abundance of caution sometimes. So we definitely got a lot of slack covering hurricanes out in the field before the storm hit, and there were still people walking around, and the word sensationalism got thrown out a lot. So it's a really fine line, and I never got too upset about that. But I think that overall, I think women have it worse because unfortunately we're still at a time that obviously women are judged too much about certain physical characteristics or age as opposed to their enormous skill, their ability to be quality journalists. So, at the end of the day, I think that women have it way tougher than men do in the news business. And I think people would say in almost every single industry. But in one where someone's looking at you every single day and you're constantly being judged physically as well, that's an enormous obstacle that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
Mhm. And is there one story from your entire career that sticks out to you for some reason?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I have a couple. I don't want to pick them, but just to pick one, I was working at WLBT television in Jackson, Mississippi, the NBC affiliate. And we got a lead that there was a guy in Mississippi. They sell other places, but apparently Mississippi, this isn't common in Florida. They sell burial insurance. So, you pay in so that you don't have to write a big check when your loved one passes. So we got a tip that somebody was running a burial insurance scam where essentially he would take the money, and then when a loved one would pass away, he wouldn't come around with the money and actually help pay for the burial. Nobody could find this guy. So it was a credit to my news director, number one, back in the day, and I'll say his name, Dennis Smith. He's not in the business anymore. He let me do something. Are you ready for this? As a crime reporter, he let me not turn a story for 3 days and just work on this. I mean, this was, I didn't even know what to do with myself.
That's insane. Yeah, that's very uncommon. That's extremely uncommon. Normally they're asking you to do 3 packages in a day.
Right. Especially in the medium to small markets. And for anybody who's watching this who's never been in the news business, understand that there are investigative teams who go out and do these things. I was a general assignment reporter that was covering day of news, and we had this lead and he gave it to me. So we tracked this guy down. We found him, and he was washing his van. He was in a home that wasn't listed, but we drove around Mississippi at different addresses that were listed for him and his business. But we found him in a house that nobody knew about, and he was washing his van, and we pulled up and we were hot rolling. So the camera was rolling, my mic was ready. He saw us, he jumped in his van, closed the door, rolled up the window, and I knew I was going to get sound from him. So I knew that my questions had to be the sound.
Okay.
I pointed the mic towards him, and I started asking questions that you would if he, just to get his side of the story. We have these people making these claims. What do you have to say for yourself? So on and so forth. I had proof of the burial insurance purchases in my hand. I was waving in front of him. He then rolled down the window a little bit, and I dropped my card through the window, and I said, if you want to share your story, I'm right here. So to make a long story short, we did a second story, and we showed I believe it was the Secretary of State, our news coverage. Eventually, the state of Mississippi changed the burial insurance protection laws, and which at the time were I believe the second or worst in the country. So that if anybody gets scammed, that there's some type of recouping. And this guy lost his license, and I believe he eventually went to jail, or at least got indicted for something.
Ultimate question: what happened to the van?
Yeah. No, he lost his license. I believe he went to jail. The criminal aspect of it started happening when I was already out of the market and down in Miami. But I believe he was eventually charged and came to some agreement, I believe, with the state attorney, and then he lost his insurance license.
Wow, that's quite an operation he's got there.
Yeah, and we were, we were given the AP Award for Investigative Story of the Year that year, and were nominated for an Emmy. And the award certainly didn't mean as much as knowing that the law was changed in the state. Like
I like my favorite part is you putting the business card through his window. That's a nice. Did you get that on camera? That's a nice.
No, yeah, no, it's a great shot.
That's
It's a great shot.
oh my
Yeah,
god. I
yeah.
wonder what he ever did with it. Do you ever think he wanted to call you or?
Um, I don't think he did. He probably wanted to lay low. I'm trying
Hello.
to see if I think he tried to call my boss. I think he called
Ooh.
my
Let me
boss.
guess. He was going to complain about you or something.
Right,
Yeah.
sure. And
That
the
you were harassing him or something or.
right.
You
And
know.
I was just asking for his side of the story. And eventually my questions to him turned into, um, have you done this? And are you, if you did do this, are you ashamed? Do you have any type of, anything you want to say to these folks who had to spend their own money to bury their loved one?
I'd also like to point out something else. They gave you a photog for the story too, so that's
Yeah.
in itself
Well,
a big deal. You got 3 days
let
to
me,
work on it, and you got a photographer.
WLBT, the NBC affiliate in Jackson, is a dominant station in that entire state. I was very fortunate for, in my second job, at the time it was market 89 or 90 out of 210 TV markets. There were a lot of photogs, very talented photogs. So no, I was very fortunate to land at that station. I learned probably my most news journalism at that station.
That's a really cool story. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so I want to ask you about viral stories. What do you think makes a viral story?
Gosh, in
And
today's
I know if
modern
you
day,
had the perfect answer, you'd have been like, "Man, Jennifer, I would be rich because I would be turning out viral stories every day."
you know, because in the capacity that I work now, it's still essentially journalism on the outside. I think that a good viral story, like any good story, starts with emotion. My news director in West Virginia said to me, I remember it to this day, and I give seminars about this to public relations folks and public information officers. Um, the tie that binds us all, no matter your gender, your socioeconomic background, your sexual orientation, what region of the country you're in, sometimes even the language, the only thing that ties us all together is emotion. It doesn't even matter what side of the political aisle you're on, it's emotion. So I think that's something that has, and that emotion can be happy, funny, sad, shock. If something that really just seeps that emotion and is quick, short to the point with great visuals, those are the stories that go viral. And of course, anything that deals in exclusivity. If laughing is the emotion, if we see, a penguin who, if somebody just does a silly video about like some penguin who delivers lunches to kids from like a sandwich shop in South Africa, I mean, we've never seen that before. And I think we would laugh, and that kind of thing would go viral all day long. But one of the things that I see a lot as a, for instance, that goes viral is some of the amazing organ transplant stories. I'm an organ donor, so I have an interest in that. And whenever I see those stories, those things tend to go viral all the time, because you have sacrifice and sadness and happiness in life, and these moments where especially if it's an anonymous donor, the donor's family and the transplant recipient meet for the first time. If you're not crying, you have no soul.
That is
Those are the
really
things.
neat. So you're an organ donor?
Yeah, I do. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. I donated my kidney to my mother about a year or so ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a whole nother story.
Oh.
But no, I that's the thing. I think, and I think good journalists understand that already, especially in television, because you can really materialize emotion much easier. But in the business communications world, it's just something that most PR firms and PR professionals are really scratching the surface on, because there's such a pressure in this world, in that world, to just get the facts and as much cool information about your client out there. And you forget that, a business isn't a structure. It's something that's full of people, and people have emotions.
Okay, so after you left news, you ended up going into the media relations publicity side. So I want to talk about what you're doing, because that kind of goes into some of my other questions. So tell us about Brandstory Communications.
Well, Brandstory Communications is most specifically a media relations and content marketing firm. Now, we fall under the public relations world, but I think, frankly, public relations is a very general statement. And I think nowadays in most industries, you want to find specialists in things. So We're hired most often for earning publicity around the country, different clients of all different sizes. We do crisis communications, media crisis communications, because as we tell our clients all the time, we've been on the side of covering the crisis. So to be on the other side, we have a sense of can anticipate what's going to happen, how to respond, timely responses. I do a lot of media coaching and training for interviews. The person who's never been on camera before, or even the most veteran person, can always deal with some good one-on-one or classroom-based coaching. And then, and it's really something we've invested in a lot over the last year or so, is content marketing. I've said that today is the best time ever, that if you are in the news business and you don't want to be in the news business anymore, now's the best time to come out. And it's for the purposes of being a content marketer. And for those who don't know what content marketing is, tell me if this sounds familiar to our former industry. You're a business and you have messages and stories about you, and you need to get it out to a target audience so that they will begin to pay attention to you, you earn their trust, and they stay committed to you. So basically, content marketing is helping turn a business's marketing operation into a newsroom. Because now with owned media channels, every social media channel, which you utilize obviously so well, email marketing and websites, those are your distribution networks. Those are your different channels where you get your messaging out for. So you have to take a marketing approach that's everything from establishing an editorial calendar from over 90 to 120 days. How are you going to utilize video to tell those stories? Knowing that your video and your social media marketing elements of it can't be hard sells anymore. It's got to be a story. You can't have a chef and just talk. If you're a restaurant, don't have a chef that's just an awesome chef and you talk about why he's an awesome chef. Dive into why did you want it? Sit him in front of the camera and go, why did you want to become a chef? What's your favorite dish? Find that personal story, because 1,000 chefs are going to say that they're the greatest chef, but each chef has their own individual story that may make that next level connection that will make somebody decide, you know what, I want to try that restaurant out. I like that chef and it seems like what he cooks is a good thing. So it's making businesses understand that they're not structures, they're people, and people connect to people. You tell those stories from products to people about a company, and you have a good content marketing operation.
I think it's so interesting that you were telling me you run this business like a newsroom. So you're really taking the skills you have, from working in the TV news business and bringing them more to a private sector company. How do you feel like that makes your company stand out from the other PR and media relations type shops?
Well, my staff is only news people. I mean, I've met a couple of good PR people in my life, but bless their hearts, I think all those news people have received those press releases, end up in the garbage or put us to sleep. I promote that press releases are dead. They shouldn't be called press releases anymore. They should be called story pitches. So as somebody who's received a press release, if you've never been in PR in your life, you're already in a better place to do media relations than 85% of the public relations professionals out there who haven't spent one entire day in the newsroom as a reporter or producer or editor. Because in the way the PR world has generally operated for years, a press release gets sent out, the same press release gets sent out to everybody. We as journalists know, if you're going to pitch a TV station, do not pitch them a newspaper story. The details of the story should be short and sweet to a television station and should include, for instance, here's the video you're going to get if you cover this story. And then also the idea that a news person knows story structure well, before you send your press release, if you've basically built that story from not only, you can't just have your talking head person of your company if you're a PR professional, just find the everyday average Joe who's positively affected by whatever your company is producing or does or anything like that. You got the emotional human tale already. So an understanding of story structure and an understanding of newsroom operation, an understanding and a willingness to take the time and effort that is needed, that you don't pitch the Orlando Sentinel the same way you pitch the CBS affiliate in Orlando. You don't pitch CNN. You don't pitch headline news in the same way you pitch CNN. They operate differently. You know it. There's different shows who want different things in different ways. So a good media relations really takes a specialty, and no one's better to do it from the outside than the people who have already worked on the inside.
Yeah, no, that is so true. And it was amazing how many awful pitches, like if you could even call them pitches, I don't know. A lot of
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of people out there, I think, that think they're medium is savvy, and they in their mind they are. But when you get their email, you're like, oh my gosh, this is not going to happen. And I don't think they realize you need to make their life easier and not harder. And
1,000%.
so many of those press releases just didn't do that. Like you were like, why do I have to click on 7 things to get to the information? And by then you've moved on.
Yeah, you and I wish I had it with me. It's in my other office, but I called a colleague of mine at a local television station about a year ago, and I said, "Send me every press release you get today. Just send me from 12 to 11:59." He sent me. I printed them all out, and I went to go and to give one of my seminars, and I held it up in a big manila envelope, and it was 312 press releases. So the understanding, and this was in the summer when news is technically slower. And so the understanding that the news media does not have time to dive into what you want them to cover. You need to just present it, like serve it up on a platter, is one of the biggest obstacles to get through to have an understanding of why or how to best pitch the media and best earn your stories.
Well, I appreciate your advice to the other media and PR pros out there. I think they could probably learn a lot from you.
Well, I tried to spread the good word. I don't want anybody else dealing with bad press releases like I'm sure you and I have
Uh,
thousands of
or
times.
the phone calls. Did you get my press release? That was the one. And it's like, are you coming to my event? I was like, we're not going to call you if we're not coming to the event. We probably won't even call you if we do show up.
Right. And that's a reality. And look, and it depends on the market. If you're in a smaller market, you got a little bit more leeway there. Medium markets, depending on which one. That's the other thing. Like you have to take the time as a media relations professional to know your market. Vegas is technically a medium market, but you don't do follow-up phone calls about whether or not someone's coming to an event because that's a speed market. You don't do it in the top 20s for the most part because once again, that's a speed market. You don't do that like in LA. They will literally hang up the phone before you're done. And it's not even being rude. But I would say this, being on the PR side, and I'll stand up for PR professionals here on this one. I think follow-up calls are valid. It depends on when. So what I usually coach is to people who've never been in the news business, try and get your press releases out before the 9 o'clock morning meeting that every single television station and newspaper has in the country. The 9:30 morning meeting where people come together and decide day of the week. Don't call during the newscast or right before.
No.
Like basically between the hours of 3:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m., don't call. Just don't. You shouldn't even email then. And then there are sweet spot times, that 12:30 to 2 o'clock time, that 10 to 11, and certainly if you're doing something for Nightside, maybe 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. You can call them. So there's something to be said of a follow-up call because so many emails come through that I don't think every assignment editor sees every single one of them. But it's a lot about timing. Like everything else, there's kind of an in-between that has to be there.
Yeah, well, very good thoughts. So do you have any advice for young people who are thinking about going into broadcast journalism?
First off, I applaud you for thinking about wanting to do it. I was happy to see that it looks like we have the highest rate of kids enrolling in journalism school than we've had in many, many years. I think Pew Research came out with that. So that's great news. And I think we know a lot of the reasons of what's going on in society right now, why that would happen. But my advice is to follow your passion. The news business is something, whether it's print or online, essentially is what it's going to be now, or television. It's got to be something you're passionate for because you're going to get beat down by bosses and salaries and living in nowhere parts of the country you never thought you'd have to deal with, and people from the outside and, people giving you bad calls telling you you're terrible. I had an English teacher call me in my first job telling me about how bad my grammar was.
Wow. Do they not
just
have enough to do in their life? That's like...
Yeah, well, you know what? Actually, I said to her, I go, listen, I went to public school, so my grammar's pretty good. Also, I'm in television, so my grammar doesn't have to be really that.
Yeah. No, you don't even have to be able to spell in TV news. You really don't.
As long as the chyron is right.
Yeah, as long as you can phonetically say something, you're good to go.
Right. I had a news director when I went to a convention of lots of news directors. They review your tapes and you try to get your next job. I had a news director who looked at my tape and said, you switched tenses in your sentence 3 times. And I go, I know. At the time, I work in Miami. We can do that. We can jump tenses. from one sentence to another. So no, but in terms of the advice, that's the thing. You got to have a passion for it. I think my journalism 101 class at University of Florida, they said, okay, you all want to be journalism majors, the teacher said. So most of you will lose your job at some point and you didn't deserve it. All of you will get underpaid at some point and you'll get treated poorly half the time. Okay, who still wants to be in this business?
All right. Did
And
a lot of people
three or
switch
four kids
majors or
walked out.
something? Wow.
Yeah, 3 or 4 kids walked right out. They changed their major. And that's what's going to happen. The business is going to keep cutting at you and cutting at you. Those who fight through are the ones who are meant to do it. You know, I knew that I was at where I wanted to be when I decided not to go back into the news business. Because after the economy collapsed, I had chances to go back. And I realized that a lot of what PR was really just being a journalist, but for companies. And I still felt like my foot was in the business because I was telling stories and I was dealing with the news people that I love so much and respect so much in trying to earn publicity. So I still kind of felt like I was in the business, but with better hours and a higher financial ceiling.
Yeah. How do you feel like the business has changed and is going to change as far as like the platforms we tell the stories on? You see a lot of new media outlets coming out that are really getting a lot more eyeballs than traditional media. It's interesting to look ahead and see, like, there will always be a need for journalism, but I always wonder what kind of form it'll be in 10 or 20 years. What do you think?
You know, I didn't have to, social media hadn't hit the news business that hard when I was in my final year. That's when there was really those conversations in the newsroom where everybody has to start having their own station only accounts and those kind of things. But from what I've seen now, still having kind of a foot in and a foot out and having to utilize those channels, I think I think everything is essentially on-demand programming now. So when newsrooms have and I think most of them do, have an understanding that the 27-minute, 22-minute newscast is over. You're not going to get a lot of those. Maybe morning shows have the best chance of having a long life of still people turning off the TV, putting down the controller, and then doing their morning routines of getting ready and listening to the news, watching a little bit of it. But I think as television goes into computers and they're one and the same thing, I think the on-demand is, okay, I want to watch the news. I want to see the lead story. I want to see the weather. And then, oh, that story about that new business, that's in my neighborhood, so I want to read that. And that's it. And so it's going to be more like 9-minute newscasts.
Yeah.
So it's basically this big newscast pie that we've had for 50 years. I think it's just, there's got to be a realization that it's just going to be all sliced up. And you have to present each slice as best you can as its own independent outlet, because everybody's just going to click and go see what they want to do. You know, and the precursor to that was you know, the ability to rewind or fast forward through shows or newscasts now. But now it's on hyperdrive because of social media. And I think newsrooms are doing a better chance. I think one of the great things about social media for newsrooms is the personalities in the newsroom. You get to know them a little bit better. And that, I think, was always an asset in the news business.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that stations are not really cashing in on as much as they could. For instance, I watch a lot of YouTube. Clearly, I'm a fan. And I subscribe to channels not for the content, but for the person.
Right.
Like, it's all about for me, it is all about who that person is. I've subscribed to channels that I have zero interest in the subject matter. I'm not a sports fan. I subscribe to a guy's sports channel just because I liked him. I subscribe to a gamer channel. I'm not a gamer, just because I thought he was really funny.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing, that stations are serving up these stories in the newscasts, but I think they could really go far, especially on platforms like YouTube. You know, some are doing better than others on Facebook, Snapchat, if they really make it very personality driven. Like, again, that's why people watch, you know, whether you like it or hate it, you know, they'll watch shows like, trying to think of some of the late night shows. Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. They'll watch, you know, George Stephanopoulos. A lot of people really go for the personality. Doesn't even matter what they're talking about. And I think that's one thing that stations really could do a lot with if they let them unleashed a little bit, at least to develop a fan base.
Yeah, and I think the networks have gotten that for a long time. That never has really swayed the importance of the actual person and personality and letting the viewer into their life. I think that local news dimmed out, you know, dropped out of that for a while. I think that I think that there's a template in local news where perhaps if a person of a certain, a man who has dark hair, who's been here for 5 years and he leaves as a reporter, I'm just going to go find another man who
Another.
looks similar and has a skill, and I'm just going to plug him in. And I think that that's happened a lot. And you've seen a lot of anchors lose their jobs over the years. A lot of it's because of salary changes ever since the economic collapse and all of that. But I think that if news managers embrace the importance of the personality of the people on the air, I think that that's a really good way to keep bringing people in. Because if you think about the consumer is going to be, now is, for the most part, or who you hope it to be, Generation X and millennials. Well, and whatever millennials is, whatever it's called after millennials, this is the reality show generation.
Oh yeah, totally.
This mass consumption of reality show TV. And while the topic of a bunch of people living in a house and then going to a club is, you can relate to it, but there's like 1,000 of those. The only separating factor of a show like that compared to something similar to it are the people within it. So I think the news business is no different at all. And that even goes to, I've seen some of my colleagues in the business, when they're on their way to the story, they'll do a tease right on Facebook. We're heading to this is what we're doing. And then they'll bring in their photog and say, okay, you're going into this. What are some of the things that we might be looking for? You bring people into the reality show element of it. And I don't know how you feel about it, but
I love that. And I like reality TV, so I'm a fan. When you were on air, did you, in under contract, did you feel prohibited personally? Like, I was talking to Joe Gervin about it, and he said there were certain restrictions to things he couldn't do. I know you weren't there quite for the social media wave, but did you ever feel like your personal life was restricted in any way?
No. And frankly, because I was in a place where I didn't really want to share my personal life too much. Most of the time that I was in the news business, I was a bachelor anyway. So, my life was hanging out with my friends and working, but it was mostly working. So, it was just my passion and focus on my career and its growth and doing my job correctly. So I didn't necessarily have as much going on in my personal life that felt like it was even valuable enough to share. But I think that, you open the curtain to something that people have never seen behind the curtain of, people get more interested because it's a new view.
Yeah.
People need a new view of the news business. And unfortunately, the narrative of the new view right now is too much negativity on fake news and all these other terrible things that are kind of untrue and are out in the world. There's fake news out there, but there's got to be an education of the general public. The general public has to make the effort to understand what is real, what is fake, what's a traditional outlet, what is a pop-up that gets run out of somebody's basement in a foreign country, and realize that those things exist.
Like the YouTube channels with the robo voices, and you're like, yeah, this is not real. I like where you're going with the reality TV, though. I think that could work for news. And there's a couple personalities I've seen with really big followings. That guy from Cincinnati, Bob Herzog, I think he's got like 225,000 Facebook fans, but he's the one, he does that like Friday dance party. He's a morning anchor, and then he does that.
I've seen that.
He had that viral video about the male makeup thing. Did you ever see that where he's like, I'm violently blending? So
Yeah.
he's really been able to cash in on. I mean, he lives in Cincinnati, which is not the biggest market, but he has a very large social media following.
Because
so that's pretty impressive.
It's real. It's live storytelling. It's like what we were talking about before. People want to connect to other people. In your stories, you want to have the emotion, have an understanding for a person's goals and wants and needs and the special parts of their personality. And you try to tell that in a story when you're covering news. Well, a news person can't be a robot anymore. Walter Cronkite is rolling over in his grave to hear that, but it's just a reality of where if we want to keep news alive, we need to let people into that world, especially in a hyper celebrity driven culture.
Hey, it worked for the Kardashians.
Yeah.
That's a pretty extreme example.
You can't knock their success in whatever capacity that success came out to be. But yeah, it's also because I have so much respect for people in the news business, especially those who have been in it for a while and climbed through the markets. And I know their personalities, and they're just really good.
Being in a news, it's a really interesting place. It's, you have fascinating conversations, and a lot of these people have wicked sense of humors. So, I mean, really, you could tap into that. Yeah. But no, those are all good docs. Do you have a favorite social media platform?
I might be old with it, but you know, I still like Facebook, even though it trends a little bit older. But Instagram, I'm really just basically in between Facebook and Instagram. I think when it comes to my evaluation of a client, if we're getting them in for social media, it all depends on what they sell and who their target audience is, who we choose or what we choose for which social media outlets are the best. But you know, in this day and age where video is going to be an absolute essential, video at this point in marketing it's like having an engine to a car. Like if businesses are not really utilizing video in some type of consistent capacity, they might as well just not even market. And the reasons behind it are so logical. Being in our cell phones, having a short attention span, not wanting to read small words in a cell phone, but you can press a button and get the same 45-second pieces of information. That's all really important.
Would you have ever guessed that YouTube would be where it is now? Like when it came out 10 years ago, I never saw it going this way. Even to this day, I'm like, wow, there's so many people making a living on YouTube and having a huge following on YouTube. I would have never, I honestly did not see that coming, which I feel kind of stupid about that, but.
You know what it is? We're as Americans, we're very interested in what each other does. We're very nosy people for the most part, especially when you keep moving down the generational line. Maybe it's that reality show kind of sociological element of it. I certainly didn't see it. I think I probably thought of YouTube in the same way that a lot of older people used to think about Facebook, which is it's cute puppies and cute baby pictures, you know, and people just taking pictures of themselves at a restaurant. And it's become so much more. I mean, having children now, some of the favorite shows my kids watch, my 5-year-old especially, that are specifically kids programming, I am blown away by the views that these people get.
Especially those toy channels. You look at them, you're like,
God.
you know, do you have any, it's like how much money those people must be making with unboxing toys?
My son watches like hours and hours of people pulling Hot Wheels out of the box and talking about them.
All right. Note to self, I need to buy Hot Wheels after I finish.
Yeah, when do we start the Hot Wheels channel?
Yeah, I'm gonna do. I've had a thought for a while that I think some parent needs to come up with a funny channel where they help other parents put together stuff, like toy assembly or like putting together like your typical household stuff. I think if they can do it in kind of a funny, like kind of, because that's the thing. A lot of parents are frustrated with stuff like that. So that's been my thought for a while. I was like, somebody needs to do that. Like there's a couple times I'm like, you know what? If somebody did a channel like this, it would probably do really well. So, hey, if you have any clients that like putting stuff together, I think because I have not seen any channel that specifically does that.
We'll think about it as any good entrepreneurial business model. Find a need and fill the need. That's good basic starting a business 101. If there is no business where you can just bring your toy in and somebody makes it for you, in this case, you just put that on YouTube instead. Like that's where a lot of these YouTube videos come from.
Yeah, it's like, hey, you know, I can help people with this. Like I watch a lot of tutorial videos and, you know, it's crazy what's out there. What are your favorite types of channels to watch? Besides the Hot Wheels channels, I know those are your favorite.
You know, I spend so much time trying to have those moments with my son watching the same thing. There's just a lot of kid ones I actually watch. You know, I actually get, and this ties into a previous conversation we had about direction of news. I watch Vice News a lot on YouTube.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
I think Vice News does, and it brings up the question. We've thought in news, everything has to be shorter and faster and less detail, and nobody has the appetite for good investigative news. Vice News is excellent investigative news where they're essentially not limited in their packages. There is usually no voiceover. It's all, as we used to call in the business, nat audio. You know, I think Vice News, I would want like a Vice News unit in every television station around the country.
You know, that is so true. Vice News, you can watch it. I can sit and watch Vice News for hours.
It's spectacular work.
They do some really good stuff.
It's like Frontline on PBS. Frontline does the work that journalism was meant for. Vice News is doing the same thing from this deeper, darker documentary style angle. And that's another interesting way that I think news can go. I think news is shot generally in the same way. Videographers do an exceptional job trying to find the new way to shoot a lot of the same interviews. But there's something about that kind of darkness where you're the fly on the wall, experience the story as it occurs.
Yeah, and you haven't seen a Vice News really on a local level. It's
No.
all, they're like bigger stories, like they do like international stuff. I've seen them do stuff with like wild tigers and everything, but drugs. But you don't see a lot of that in the local level, and that is another way that they could again capitalize on something that they have an advantage in, which is covering a particular area.
Yeah, yeah. And I had a client that was on Vice News who really did the story, the same kind of story that I pitched, and had been done really well by local stations around the country. And actually, this client is going to be on the Doctor's Show at some point this or next season. But the way Vice approached it, it really was being in the house with a family that was going through a very difficult time, and just letting those sound bites come alive. I used to joke around with friends in news all the time that I think one thing that helps it is there is no filter in Vice News, including the cursing. And there's something very, as we used to say in my neighborhood, keeping it real. So, I'd love to be able to start a local news format in a place where cursing was allowed, so that when you go and you cover the terrible thing, somebody's emotions can really just get poured out in the way that they would say it to their friend or their family. And that there's that connective process. So, because I think, once again, and I probably said it too many times, everything about the news business and in this marketing PR world, or as I like to call it, brand journalism, it really is about connection. What are you doing in your newscast, in your story, in your social media to remove all obstacles and have a connection from A to B that people can understand?
So, as someone now about 10 years out of the business, what do you have to say to people who are thinking about getting out or trying to make the transition? What have you learned, and what do you want to pass along to your fellow journalists?
Well, I think it bears repeating. There's never been a better time, I think, for people with a good journalism background. I'm not talking about like 2 years in a small market. You need more than that. I think that there's never been a better time. And also, don't assimilate. If you're going to get into communications business in any capacity, PR, marketing, advertising, whatever, don't assimilate to the status quo of those industries. Don't let the traditional PR person turn you into a traditional PR person. All you have to be is a journalist. The difference is you're not covering a beat in a courthouse or a certain market. You're covering a client, and you're diving into that client and finding those stories you think would be the most interesting for their target audience. That is still journalism. That is still storytelling. And no one has a skill better than news people who have covered all different types of stories in all different environments on the hardest deadlines to be able to do it. So be your true self. You can be a journalist outside of traditional news journalism, and it'll take you far.
Was there what was like kind of the biggest culture shock you found outside once you got out? Like was there some, just sort of like leaving, because a few people have told me that went, they took like a desk job. They said the pace is a lot slower outside of news. That's one thing I've gotten from a few people.
Yeah, actually, that's funny. And I think we talked about it a little bit before. I didn't understand lunch break.
Yeah.
I didn't understand, everybody was like 11:30. Between the time I started my company and the time I was in news, I worked for a small PR firm for a little bit. And people were leaving like 11:30, 11:45, 12. I'm like, where's everybody going? Because I just brought a sandwich, and I still do it now. Unless I'm in a client meeting or I'm taking a member of my team out or something, I bring my food to my table at my office and keep working and eating as we go. So lunch break, and the importance of lunch break, that was a culture shock to me. Because think about it, in the news business, when you're on the field or you're a line producer, 5 stories break, you're not having lunch, or you're at least eating lunch at your desk. I remember being in a live truck and pulling over. I would bring lunch sometimes, in part to save money, bring lunch from my house. We'd pull into a gas station. I would use the microwave in the gas station to heat up my food, and then jump back in the live truck, and we just go to the next scene.
So life hack from an ex-TV reporter: use the microwave at the gas. That's the first time I've heard that. I like that.
I think people use. I don't know if I'm the only one, but you do what you can if you have to heat up your food.
Also, you volunteer to go to the assignments where there's free food. That's another one. Go to the one where there's like a media craft service table or something, or like it's a lunch or something.
Right. I found myself covering so much hard news. I didn't get as many of those as maybe I would have liked to. But yeah, the lunch thing I think would be a small scale thing. And then also, and I don't say it specifically about the people I worked with at that firm, but I think generally speaking, you'd be surprised at how many people who aren't from news don't work as hard as news people do. Like when we're going into a business, the two things that made me feel very confident really quickly when I was out of the news business and doing PR was the fact that my skills as a journalist, it was obvious to me, applied in not only building the story, but the fact that I had connections around the country to earn media that I can present to, and I'm not just like blind emailing people. And the second thing is that I would get in there before everybody else, and most of the time I would leave once everybody else, including the guy who owned the place, left. I mean, he would come in and say, JP, you got to go get some sleep. I'm like,
you're
what?
probably like, I'm just happy to get weekends off, man. That's
weekends off.
Get weekends off, no overnight shifts. I have holidays off. This is great.
Yeah, it's like, let's see, I get Thanksgiving off. What is this holiday stuff? I felt bad. Sometimes I was really happy. The story I probably hated covering often was Black Friday. Oh. I hated being in the mall and covering Black Friday. And anybody who's my friend who's worked with me in the business, they probably know this. But that Black Friday one was just because it was just it's the same story all the time, and it's a nightmare. But yeah, it was. If you're getting out of the business, you keep that work ethic, and you will outwork people. You will outwork the general public for the most part, and that's clear and simple to me.
Oh, I really like that. So journalists out there, TV friends, just know that that work ethic will carry you far. Thank you so much for sharing all this. If you have anything else to add, where can people find you online? Feel free to plug away.
Well, once again, the name of my company is Brandstory Communications. You can visit us at brandstorycommunications.com. Look us up in Facebook and our business page on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram, and eventually you'll start running on too much. Our YouTube channels, we have a lot of our content marketing videos that we produce for our other clients, and then a lot of the publicity that we've earned over a couple of years. So, and I also just want to make it clear to anybody watching that I'm available. If you're in the business and you want to talk about it and you need any tips, I know that I've been blessed and very fortunate in where I am right now and what I'm doing. And I know that that's something to pass on, because it's not that I'm the smartest human being in the world that puts me in a place right now that I'm successful, successful enough to take care of my family. It's that a lot of it was getting lucky and working hard, and I just want to make sure that I can help anybody who wants to transition out of the business.
Well, I'm so happy to hear about your success since leaving. Thank you so much for doing this. And I want to give you the opportunity, JP, to ask the viewers of this channel any question you would like, anything. It doesn't have to be related to public relations or news. It could be random. Someone said, who was the best Batman? So.
Well, I think I want to ask a news question.
All right.
Not to be boring, but I want to ask one news question that I'm really curious about. Has the narrative of fake news and kind of the general feeling of news people not being as trusted as before, or that's kind of swirling the drain in the public, is that further motivating to do what you're doing as a journalist? Has it made you just recommit and advocate for, or is it pushing you farther away? Is it pushing you more like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm getting out? I think that would be the most serious question that I would ask.
That is a good one. Thank you so much for asking that. So question of the day, I'm going to leave that in the description box. And also, again, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this interview with JP, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to XTV Producer for more conversations just like this one. I'll see you guys next time.